So I am delighted to be with my friend who I've gotten to work with a decent amount recently, Professor Heidi Gardner from Harvard, who has published two incredible works that I rely on as Bibles, Smart Collaboration and I'll get the title wrong, Heidi, but you can correct me, Smart Collaboration for Hiring. And then now we've got Smart Collaboration for In-House Lawyers, which I'm super excited to read, and I know a lot of people who will watch this will be. But if you don't mind, I would actually like to start, you've got such a fascinating confluence in your practice, your profession of the law and statistics. I know about your background with McKinsey. How did you tell us a little bit about how you grew up and how you got into having a love for understanding analytics and applying them to professional service firms?
Well, I don't know how far back in ancient history you want to go, but let me start out with an unexpected place, which is I grew up in Amish country. I grew up outside of Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow.
Literally, my parents' property bordered an Amish farm, and my maternal grandmother was Mennonite. Neither of my grandmothers finished high school. So, came from intellectualism and empiricism, and science were not particularly valued or trusted or part of the daily conversation. But I was really privileged as I was in high school, maybe 16, 17 years old, to start to get exposure through some summer programs where I had gotten scholarships to scientific thinking, to real rigorous thinking when it came to history and social sciences and getting different kinds of perspectives and bringing data into that mix. And I found it truly eye-opening. I mean, it was an absolute, breath of life into what I had been experiencing up until that point. And I've never lost the passion for really trying to dig into a subject deeply from lots of intellectual perspectives. And then I've been blessed. My parents, in as much as they didn't have an opportunity for a great education, they put that as a very high priority for me. Having gone to Penn undergrad, I studied Japanese there. Having lived in Japan, again, what a fabulous opportunity to look at the world through an incredibly different lens. And speaking the language gave me the opportunity to live with families there and soak in the culture in ways that I couldn't have done if I weren't, deeply immersed and speaking with them. And so, I feel like so many of these different perspectives that I've had along the way have now melded into this deep passion that I have and continue to practice, which is going after a subject from every conceivable angle, triangulating in my research. The work that I do with firms, I'm often, talking to clients, I'm gathering their financial data, I'm interviewing the executive team, I'm surveying the masses, and bringing all of these different lenses in to say, what inferences can we draw? What do we really know about what's happening?
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, and the clarity of thought that is required that I suspect you acquired. I mean, I've driven through Amish and Mennonite country 7 or 8 times because I went to Dartmouth and we would drive through that part of the world when I would go back up to school. And it's beautiful country. And the solitude that I imagine that you had, without some of the noise that a lot of folks today are so overstimulated, allows you to have the clarity of thought to come up with these great ideas, and the way you synthesize all this data with really smart takeaways is, that's why I love doing these, because you realize something about people's past, leads them into their path. So thank you for sharing that. That's exactly what I wanted you to talk about, not knowing your history. So you went through college. To tell us the order of your graduate school education, and then you went to McKinsey, of course. So give us that background as well.
Absolutely. So coming out of university, I had a degree in Japanese, and I joined Procter & Gamble in part because, having spoken German from growing up and studying German as a kid, and then studying Japanese, I thought, well, it's a huge multinational company. Maybe I'll get to go work internationally with Procter & Gamble. And then long story short, through restructurings and whatever, it became harder and harder to go overseas with that organization. So I found my own way overseas. I got a Fulbright fellowship. And I lived in Germany, lived in what had been the former East, and was working for the German government at the time. I was teaching English and training teachers and doing a lot of change management in the schools and so forth there. And it got me really interested in change management and some of the people dimensions. It's a field that I learned is called organizational behavior. And I did my first master's at the London School of Economics. I had some intention of going straight into a doctoral program there. I was studying industrial relations and management, but McKinsey came along and they convinced me that they do primary research, and I happily joined up and spent 5 incredible years there. I lived in London and New York and South Africa and worked all around the world with McKinsey, and it was an incredible eye-opener. But it gave me exposure to the problem that I have been studying now for 2 decades. At McKinsey, I had the opportunity to work on and eventually lead client service teams. And I observed that although, each team had its unique mix of people on board, and McKinsey was fabulous in terms of sourcing talent from lots of different places. So, my master's, I was working with concert pianists and military officers and astrophysicists, and we'd come together in these teams. Sometimes it was amazing what we could do together with the diversity of expertise. And then other times it was kind of solid work, but it wasn't, lighting anyone on fire. And so that experience at McKinsey really opened my eyes to the difference that leadership can make and the difference that team interactions, team dynamics can make to outcomes. And when I left McKinsey for my doctorate, I went to the London Business School with the full intention of studying this problem. And I've been on that path now for 20 years. I left London Business School with my PhD in hand and was intent on moving back to the States to be closer to our family. By that time, I had 2 daughters who were born during my doctoral program, and the grandparents were screaming to get the kids closer, and we were happy. And I interviewed coast to coast in the States, and with the job at Harvard Business School, when I got that offer, it was a pretty great fit. Harvard Business School is a place that really encourages people to think deeply, theoretically, and in very rigorous ways, and practically as well. And I had the great good fortune at HBS to start teaching executives from my first few months in a faculty position. It's pretty rare, but with the McKinsey background, it gave me the opportunity to get in front of executives in the classroom, and it's been a great fit, having moved then from the business school to Harvard Law School about 6 years ago.
Yeah, there's so much there because you've been exposed to so many great institutions, and it always strikes me, when I've been at the same law firm basically for 30 years, and so I was at Hughes and Luce, and then we merged in 2008 with K&L Gates, and I've always been focused on institutional change that will last multiple generations. And I read the book about McKinsey, and I'm going to forget the name of the book, but you realize McKinsey was formed by lawyers, right? Jones Day. And
absolutely.
And so it always strikes me when I read your research and your writing that you're focused on multi-generational change. Some of these aren't quick fixes that you're suggesting. No. You're focusing on a lot of multi-generational change, and what 2 better institutions, Procter & Gamble's another one, but what 2 great institutions, Harvard and McKinsey, to kind of pick up those cues. So that's a long-winded way of asking you, for those of us who haven't had the honor of being inside McKinsey, what are some leadership principles that you drew out of McKinsey that you would say law firms would be good to copy?
One of the first, the learning from McKinsey that could really get embedded in law firms is that leadership is not a position, it's an action and an experience. And my role at McKinsey was imbued with leadership opportunities from not day one, but certainly year one. And at McKinsey, they rely on their associates for so many different kinds of leadership. And that maybe planning the practice group retreat. It might be clientele development. It might be IP development and thought leadership. But people are getting leadership opportunities and therefore mentoring opportunities and lots of feedback and risk-taking opportunities from very, very, very early in their careers at McKinsey. And then they start managing projects, the work streams in the project, and so they have client-facing responsibilities. The leadership at McKinsey, on a project team will encourage people who have done some of the analysis to present that to clients. Maybe not at the board level, but at some of the interim meetings and progress reviews along the way. And so people are building step by step by step their leadership capabilities and their confidence. And I would love to see law firms take that kind of mindset because, in my role at Harvard Law School, I'm the chair of faculty programs where we're taking people oftentimes who are about to step into their first leadership position in a law firm. They're about to become a practice group leader or an office managing partner. And boy, they are taking a step off the diving board straight into the deep end because they haven't done anything like this along the way. They've been managing matters or deals, haven't been leading. They haven't been doing the intellectual leadership. They haven't been leading people. They haven't had responsibility truly for motivating people and, or for leadership of the firm, strategic leadership. And I would love for law firms to have a much more immersive leadership experience for people as they grow up through their careers. That's one of the big takeaways that I learned at McKinsey.
I love that. And it's interesting because the guest I had last week on a podcast is a guy named Brett Walter, who's the general counsel of a company called Ahab. So here's a guy, little bit of a similar story. He's a guy who grew up in Laramie, Wyoming. His dad was the dean of University of Wyoming, and he somehow ends up as the general counsel of Ahab, one of the largest private conglomerates in Saudi Arabia, in the middle of the Bernie Madoff of the Middle East scandal. And he took exactly the same takeaway because he said that he was really scared. He was an IP litigator in D.C., and he looked to his partner and he said, what am I doing wrong? And he says, you just need to walk into the courtroom and look around and see, demystify, what is causing you this anxiety. And then when you are jumping into the deep end, you aren't so scared anymore. You've been in the deep end a couple of times. And so that's a great takeaway. I love that. And by the way, on your Harvard Executive Leadership Program, you've taught so many people who I just happen to bump into who just rave about it, including the managing partner of our, I think I mentioned to you, the managing partner of our Australia offices, Nick Nicola, who's one of my dear friends. And so, I can't even imagine as you think about all the great leaders that you've helped further along in their paths, hearing about those impacts, I imagine must be really humbling, really great. So now we turn to the concept as you're synthesizing information and you're diving more in the statistical analysis. Tell me how you came up with even the theme of smart collaboration. What was the thought behind it? Was there like a light bulb that went off one day? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, Craig, here's the little secret I'll let you in on. None of my best research ideas are ever my own. So when it comes to embodying collaboration, I take my own medicine because I know very well that the best ideas are born of discussions amongst people who have quite different experiences. Mm-hmm. And so the idea initially for smart collaboration, it has deep roots in that question I talked about at McKinsey. I was trying to figure out, why is it that some teams are so much better off at accessing and using the full complement of their members? And we found lots of different reasons through my dissertation research why that's true. And I was teaching that material at Harvard Business School. And over lunch, one of the executives said, that's a really important thing to think about is how do you get these client service teams to operate really effectively and have people contribute the most in that environment. He said, but, each of those is sort of like a mini pyramid. There's a little bit of a hierarchy. The roles are pretty clear. He said, what happens when you try to get the head of each of those pyramids to work together? In other words, how do you get partners, the client service head of this client and this client, or these different practice group heads? How do you get them to work together? Because, ostensibly they're all at the same level. They're all partners. And I thought, okay, that's a brilliant question, because you've got all of these crutches in a hierarchical team. You've got structures and so forth. What happens when you take that away and you've got high autonomy individuals who have the power to decide whether to work individualistically or collectively? And at that moment, I started doing lots of research. What do we know about this? And the answer was, we didn't know a whole lot. And we especially didn't know the answer to that question in the context of professional service firms, which, unique might be slightly over-egging the pudding, but they're pretty different from a lot of organizations. And so thinking about, this problem inside professional services, how do you get, high autonomy partners to want to work together, to give up a bit of that autonomy, ultimately for the benefit of the client, but it requires a leap of faith. And so what do we know about that? What kinds of returns on the investment does somebody get as an individual, as a practice group, as a firm? And with my nerdy data seeking hat on, I started to pursue this question. And, we have collected data records from across dozens and dozens of law firms and Big Four accounting firms and smaller accounting firms and all different kinds of professional service firms now. Sometimes in certain firms, we have more than a decade's worth of data. Billing records, timesheet records, personnel files, all anonymized, of course, but we're able to conduct some pretty sophisticated econometric models and other kinds of statistical analyses on these to really get at what are the outcomes of collaboration and, how does it differ in good times and bad? We've recently gone back to some of those data sets and said, what happened to collaboration patterns in the last major financial recession? What happened then, and how did collaboration play a role in people's ongoing successes and how they weathered the storm and so forth? And so taking this empirical perspective and having loads and loads of data allows us to crunch it in ways that we can really test hypotheses.
Yeah. Share with the audience a little bit, Heidi, what were some of those conclusions that you came out with in smart collaboration that were, I found them to be, somewhat intuitive, but also so insightful in how you get from point A to point B. So share that with the audience.
Well, chapter 1 is called the business case for collaboration. So we start there. We say, collaboration has a bit of a reputation as a soft skill, the kind of thing we get around to when our real work is done. But those of us who have worked in teams where they're cross-disciplinary and they're cross-geography and so forth, and we've really had that experience of being on fire and coming up with something fabulous, we know that collaboration truly produces unbelievable outcomes. And we wanted to try to measure that. So that's what we did in this first chapter, the business case. We found, in a nutshell, organizations and firms that engage in truly smart collaboration, intentional, well-directed collaboration, they earn higher revenues, they earn higher profits, they have much stronger customer loyalty, the kind of client loyalty that survives even when, a key partner leaves for, a different firm. Those customers or clients stay with the firm if they've had a collaborative experience with a group of partners. And so we can quantify all of those kinds of outcomes of collaboration. And because we have such, longitudinal data, we can measure collaboration patterns right now. Who's working with whom and how many partners are working across how many different practice groups and clients and so forth. Lots of ways to measure it. And then our statistical models control for all kinds of other things that would predict the same outcomes, like, what point in the economic cycle were we, and which practice was it, and individual differences, gender and their tenure at the firm. All of these factors, all of those things together allow us to isolate the effects of collaboration itself. And that's when we can see that 1, 2, 3 years down the road, people and groups, practice groups, sector groups, firms that are more collaborative end up with much better financial and strategic results. So we can demonstrate that empirically.
And it's so fascinating because, waterfalls across the entire institution, because if, to your McKinsey concept, if as a young consultant or a young lawyer, you were exposed to a collaborative approach, you're learning through osmosis how to solve problems in a way that you can never do if you're just in one little siloed area. It's so intuitive. So that begs my next question, which is, your kids are into the future and they say, Mom, I want to be a lawyer. I'm going to go work at a global firm. What tool or tools would you tell me to try to sharpen and hone to be the best law firm global partner I could be one day?
I think teamwork skills, of course I'm going to say that, but I truly think they're absolutely essential. And by that, I mean the ability to take that leap of faith and understand that if you pass somebody else the ball and they shoot it and score, that it is a win for the team. And that kind of teamwork skill, and then ultimately leading a team, the ability to be coached and to receive coaching and feedback and take that on board and improve from it, the kinds of skills that people develop in a team experience. And that could be a sports team, it could be a choir, it could be, a club. But that kind of collective experience, I think, is absolutely invaluable for the lawyers of the future, because any lawyer who thinks that being the smartest person in the room is what's going to carry them into the most successful career is, living in a TV world of what lawyering means, or at least in an outdated world. Because, think about the era we're living in right now, the COVID world. Which single piece of the puzzle is good enough to carry the day? We need healthcare experts and employment experts and real estate experts and policy experts and every one of those. And if you take any one of those lenses on its own, you could seriously misdirect a client. If you give them the technically right solution to an employment problem right now without taking the bigger, broader business perspective and thinking about things like reputation and how they're going to emerge from the crisis, and it could be really misguided. And that's why teamwork skills are so important, is to acknowledge when going it alone is the right way and when it is that you need to step back and say, this is when we should pass the ball.
Yeah, it's so, as just a witness to it in 30 years, the thing I'd add to that is it's also just more fun when you are working collaboratively with people. Being a part of an evolving organism is just a more interesting, you're adding skills to your toolkit that you wouldn't add if you're just in a siloed practice. It's intuitive, but law firms weren't built that way because they didn't necessarily lead you to the most money. So yeah, it's fascinating to think about. And so as you think about the pandemic, and you brought this up, I've been doing probably 15 to 20 of these virtual roundtables. And the neat thing is you've got clients from all over the world as opposed to going to one location and only have clients from one region. But they're very consistent themes that I could distill from these. And one of them you really hit on, which is they aren't looking for the exact right legal conclusion right now. There is no legal answer right now. So they need this confluence of business and instinct and trust and legal, yes, a little. As you think about the pandemic, how are we sharpening the skill set that will lead to more collaboration?
I think right now there are some really crucial skills that people could be working on that will allow them as people, as professionals, as firms to emerge stronger from the crisis. And so I was on the phone with the GC of a huge insurance company.
Got it.
And what we were talking about was diversity efforts. And at that company, they've had a very strong focus across the entire company, not just in the legal department, on diversity in every way you can conceptualize it for years. And this GC was saying in a town hall recently, one of the quite sort of low pay grade employees spoke up and said that she thought the company's diversity efforts over these last few years are absolutely helping everyone get through the crisis right now. This woman was an African American woman and was saying, her community is being hit incredibly hard, and she feels like she's facing some challenges which are very different from quite a lot of her coworkers. And because they had had such a strong diversity climate, she felt much more comfortable raising these issues and knowing that people would accept them and respect these differences. Mm-hmm. And, it's that kind of doubling down on diversity efforts that I think are going to separate real winner firms from those who just managed to muddle through and hang on by their fingernails by the end of the crisis. And, Craig, one of the things that I think is crucially important for us to remember is the crisis and the stress and anxiety and the isolation and lots of other factors that are, corollaries of this crisis are the kinds of factors that make diversity efforts harder. Yeah. And so in this time when it's so much more necessary to be focusing on diversity, it's actually somewhat unnatural. One of the things that we know from, my psychology background, times of huge stress and anxiety, human beings are wired to connect with other people whom they see as similar to themselves. And this happens subconsciously. And so, the term that psychologists use is homophily. It's the wonky term that means we reach out and connect with and engage with and instinctively trust essentially members of our in-group. Now, you multiply that by the thousands of interactions that are going on in any organization right now virtually, and think what that means. If I as a leader have an extra 5 minutes and I say I'm going to use that time to reach out to one of my people and, check in and see how it's going, the person who springs to mind is me. Right? I mean, just automatically that's what happens because I'm stressed and I don't have the bandwidth to think about this, and human nature kicks in at this quite primal level. Yes. And when you see that pattern happening again and again and again, who are the people who feel included in a healthy way versus those who stay out on the fringes? Mm-hmm. Who are the people that spring to mind? If there's a new opportunity, hey, that this client needs something, who are we going to bring onto the team? The person who's going to spring to mind is the usual suspect. And that might not have massive effects if, this remote working environment lasted for a month or two. But as we start to see this rolling on and on, those sort of little injustices, if you will, are going to add up or multiply. And there's a real risk that, some people are going to be just completely left out in the cold, completely unintentionally, but it's a really high risk second order consequence of some of the things that we're facing right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly why I love the way you started this conversation, because, diversity of where we all come from is such an important part of the exchange of ideas and perspectives and approach. And we as a firm, I'm very proud we're doubling down on exactly what you're talking about. And it's interesting because this is not as much of an ethnic diversity conclusion, but I'm in the middle of reading the Chernow book on Rockefeller. So John D. Rockefeller, Titan, and, of course, a lot of people have read Doris Kearns Goodwin's Team of Rivals. And what's interesting is in these times of great stress and pressure, the leaders who did the best, there aren't perfect people by any lights, certainly if you're talking about people from the 1800s, but they had a calm about them that allowed them to see through and see the bigger picture as opposed to just reacting to the times. And as a result, they took advantage of what in hindsight seems like some very obvious opportunities. And I love that. I love how the collaboration does involve diversity, and it does involve making sure that you're not just creating numbers, but you're creating communities of support so that people can feel comfortable and included. Thank you for sharing that. That was an unexpected nugget, but a great one. So you morph from thinking about it from a collaborative, solutions-oriented law firm You turned that into a book on hiring, which we'll probably gloss over a little bit today. We might come back a little bit, but I run our lateral hiring program, so I could talk to you for days about that as well. But I do want to get to your work that's just about to come out that I'm so excited. I was honored to read the first chapter of, and it's fantastic, and to see, how it lays out. But you talked about the vectors of in-house lawyers working together. So, you've talked about McKinsey, you've talked about law firms and how they need to be collaborative. Talk a little bit, how does this apply to an in-house counsel?
Well, again, Craig, I'll admit my best research ideas are never my own. The new book is called Smart Collaboration for In-House Legal Teams. And it's the result of a number of GCs emailing me, contacting me out of the blue saying, hey, we've read your Smart Collaboration book and we have those same kinds of challenges and we have the same sorts of opportunities if we're collaborating with different, individuals and groups in our organizations. But, the conclusions you draw for how to go about it for a lawyer in private practice is pretty different. What advice do you have for me as a GC? And, it only took me, half a dozen of those phone calls until I said, hey, wait a minute, I think there's a need here. So one conversation led to the next, which led to a research program, which, produced this book. And what we uncovered first in our research as lawyers is that there's not just one way to think about collaborating there. So we call them vectors. You just use that word. When, you think back to Physics 101, if, you took it in, high school or early days of college, a vector is a line with both direction and magnitude. And that's why we call it a vector of collaboration. People can reach out in different directions and they have different amounts of collaboration that need to happen with any of those groups. But the four vectors are first within the legal team. And that's harder than it first sounds like, because a lot of in-house legal teams right now are not just lawyers. They've got data scientists, they've got operations specialists, they've got lots of different kinds of experts coming together under the legal team umbrella. And so even collaboration within the legal team, that first vector, can be very difficult but incredibly necessary. The second vector we talk about is the one that's perhaps most obvious, is with the lawyers collaborating with the frontline executives, with the C-suite, with the board. And now in this crisis, we are seeing the reemergence of boardroom lawyers. So many GCs are playing a much bigger role in terms of advising the board, in terms of the future focus. This GC that I was just on the phone with, she's spending 6 hours a day on crisis calls, plus, probably her 12 hours a day of normal work. And so collaborating, with the business executives, that's the second vector and is crucially important. The third one that we identified is the collaboration between legal and other functions. And so whether that's HR, IT, you name it, that has to be really seamless. And legal has to have a way to get into those conversations, both with the executives and the other functional leaders. Wants to be sort of signing off or reviewing a decision that's de facto already been taken. We need lawyers to be getting in there early and integrating their legal perspective with the broader business issues. And then the last vector, I'll admit we cheat a little bit. We call it one vector, but it's basically, the in-house legal team collaborating with all of the outside bodies. And those could be like external counsel. It could be regulatory agencies. It could be trade associations. It could be, the kind of collaboration that happens with their peers in either competitors or in a geographic location where they're working on some societal issues or, you name it. So there's lots of different ways that GCs and the in-house legal team, lots of ways that they're collaborating with outside individuals and bodies that are incredibly important. One role that I know you play, and I think some of the most forward-thinking law firms do, is they become conveners of those kinds of discussions and workshops and working groups, and bring people together, GCs and other in-house legal team members together to talk about some of these big issues. And it's tremendously value adding, because as a GC, it's really easy to kind of get trapped in the silo of one organization. but learning from peers elsewhere, what's happening in your jurisdiction, what's happening in your, industry or sector, that's vital learning right now. I mean, we can't learn fast enough to get us through this crisis.
So you advise so many GCs and global law firms, and have long before the pandemic. What would you say if you were a general counsel right now, you would do a little bit differently through the pandemic to push on one of the vectors that you just described?
I think one differentiating action that in-house lawyers can take right now is to much more actively insert themselves early in those decision-making processes. I think that a lot of business people are unaware of how much value a legal perspective can add early on. And I mean, we are racing against time right now. I mean, things are changing, on a daily or hourly basis. We don't have the opportunity to do rework, to take a decision, bake it fully, and then go to legal and ask them to sign off on it or to check whether it's compliant. We need those legal minds in the mix as the decisions are shaping up, as we're reacting to situations. And so, one real differentiating action that in-house lawyers can take, incredibly proactive about figuring out where's the action. Who's making those decisions? What kinds of conversations are they having? And what conversations should they be having? Because if an in-house lawyer can go into the C-suite or the crisis committee or you name it, and at this moment take a nugget that they've gleaned from a counterpart in a different sector and say, this is what's going to happen to us next. I mean, that is how the GC becomes the boardroom hero. And they don't have the opportunity to sit back and wait for somebody to ask their opinion. They've got to be incredibly proactive. And, I hope for their sake, they've established some trusting relationships with their business counterparts and their functional counterparts, and they can draw on some of that social capital at this point. But even if they haven't, this is the time to do it. Letting everyone be well-intentioned. They're not there to lay down the law. They're there to make sure that they're getting that perspective into the solutioning, the decision making at the very moment when it's needed and not afterward. I think it's crucial that lawyers are doing that right now.
Yeah, I'm hearing a big, rabidly curious theme from all of your threads, right? That if people, in advance are curious about other people's perspectives at various levels of an organization, they're better able, when the shots are fired, to synthesize that information and make good, quick, instinctive decisions. It's great. It's so it's obvious, but so many people don't do it because they don't want to feel dumb that, I don't want to ask the questions.
Yeah,
right?
It really is. It is essential that people are genuinely curious because they want to. It's funny that you picked up on it. I'm glad you did, because cultivate curiosity is one of the pieces of advice that we give to people in this new book. And, through, dozens and dozens and dozens of interviews with, not just with GCs, but all kinds of members of the in-house legal team and their kind of, internal clients. So, the executives, the board members, who are benefiting from the legal advice. We've taken all of these perspectives to say, how does a lawyer cultivate curiosity? And, in the good old days, i.e. 2 months ago, what they may have been able to do was, when they were on the road for a meeting, hopefully they did something like, drop into the plant that was nearby, or go on a sales call with somebody, or spend an hour in the customer service center listening to customer calls, or, and those were the things that the incredibly forward-thinking and wildly successful professionally have done, probably as a matter of instinct. But for people, for whom that never occurred to them to go spend half a day in a meatpacking plant, now be very deliberate about it. Think about cultivating curiosity and pursuing it, because we need lawyers who are incredibly grounded in the realities, the commercial realities, the healthcare realities, the talent realities. We need people who are giving well rounded advice that's incredibly and eminently practical, not just conceptually or technically precise.
Right. And you can't get to practical if you don't observe and get real data about how people live their lives and what their perspective is. You know me now well enough to know that I love one of the things I think we are going to take away from the pandemic, and that is this need to put on a few layers of extra padding to go through life and not be vulnerable is actually, I think the lesson that you're teaching us is be vulnerable, ask the question, even if you think, gosh, maybe somebody knows the answer and I'll feel stupid. Just get out there and immerse yourself in something, and you'll be better for it. So what's that thing that you would tell a lawyer today, who's successful, but he's sitting here or she's sitting here in the pandemic, maybe a litigator, the courts are closed. What are things that lawyers should be doing right this second that furthers the objectives of what their clients want them to be doing?
I think one of the first things that a lawyer could do if they find themselves with some extra time is pick up the phone or get on one of these, because it will get people inside, the minds of others. As you can tell, I'm huge on this idea of perspective taking. And the more we can get inside somebody else's head and understand, what's driving their thinking, or, get inside their experience and how are they feeling at this moment? What is it that they are, experiencing? What's challenging for them? What's scary for them? I think that a lot of lawyers, frankly, just need to get out of their comfort zone and experience this in firsthand ways or in vicarious ways at this point, to really take on that perspective. One of the things I'm encouraging lawyers to do right now is have their juniors do the same thing. So there's a term that came up when I was doing research for my first book, called laddering. Like climbing a ladder. Having lived outside the U.S. for a very long time, it always strikes me as funny when Americans verb a noun. And so laddering, was one of those examples. But what it means is getting people at kind of each rung of experience paired up together. And again, this was something that I learned very naturally at McKinsey. We were encouraged to be, out in our clients 4 days a week, and getting to know clients, at a similar sort of tenure or seniority level. And I think that a lot of law firms don't necessarily encourage their associates to build those relationships. And it's something that could happen right now. Get the associate on the line with, and if it's not somebody in the legal department, find out if there's somebody else, who's on the line, somebody who's a line manager, somebody, handling, whatever situation, and just see if they can understand what it is that these people are going through right now. And, before we go there, no, you can't charge for this, right? Like this is a learning experience, and it's relationship building and trust building. But getting, on the phone or getting, inside one of these conversations and understanding more about people's challenges and opportunities, that's going to make somebody a much better lawyer. And, and we don't know precisely how it's going to play out. We don't know exactly when that nugget of wisdom is, going to help you see things from a different perspective. We don't know when that's going to allow you to make a connection you hadn't seen before, but we know that the ROI will be positive. And I think, having those kinds of conversations right now, again, driven by curiosity and learning, are incredibly important.
Well, the thing I love about all your books is they provide data to what is so wonderful to think could be an instinctively positive use of your time, right? I mean, we want to understand people's problems. We want to get in their heads. We want to learn about different things. That's why we became lawyers or any other professional service providers. And you give us data that validates that when you do these long play, multi-generational kind of approaches to things, you're going to be the winner. Just stick with those approaches. I always used to say, Heidi, that I was a policy debater in high school and college, and we talk about the arrogance to excellence ratio. And of course, you love people who were low on the arrogant factor and high on the excellence ratio, or high on excellence. And you are off the charts. Your humility, your ability to synthesize very difficult concepts in ways that people can process them, is so one of a kind. It's been really an honor to get to work with you. And I frankly, I look forward to doing many more of these conversations, because you have a lot to offer all of the professional service organizations, to make them better. And we've got to take that opportunity, get better, figure out how we can be of value to our clients. And I hope a lot of people listen to this because they're going to get a lot out of it.
Oh, thank you so much. I genuinely appreciate it. I mean, I feel like it's a privilege to do what I do. I absolutely love what I do. And if I can be a bit of a help to people along the way, that's, doubles the bonus.
Yeah. Well, it's been my privilege to have this conversation with you. It could have been without a video camera going. So thank you for doing it. And I look forward to doing many more of these kinds of conversations with clients and others as the months and years progress. And hopefully, eventually, we can do it in person one of these days.
Let's hope that's not too long from now. But until then, we'll do what we can.
Yes. Thanks, Heidi. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too, Craig. Take care.
Bye.